welcome to this next edition of the HR and Leadership Podcast with 2Js. And I'm joined today by Geraldine Hickey of Interim Consulting and Gemma Board, Talent and L&D from Smurfit West Rock. Morning, ladies. How are we doing?
Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, all good. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Again, just wanted to kind of tap into your experience and your knowledge on today's subject, which is really just looking at that journey from being an employee to a leader, and how do you kind of navigate that and build confidence from taking a step from where you're probably working with your peers to subsequently leading them. And just, really wanted to see what your thoughts and advices would be to anyone listening in that situation or about to face that kind of situation, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think I've been through that challenge myself earlier in my career, but I sort of work in talent and L&D, and actually transition that I see people making all the time. And I think whatever kind of industry you're in, it is something that comes up, isn't it? Because I think you kind of get to a certain level and you've developed your skill, but then typically, not always, but typically if you want to progress, it is moving into that leadership and management field, isn't it? And I think, in terms of where you spend your time then and what you focus on, it's a massive, massive shift to make. So no, it's something I've seen quite a bit.
Yeah, and very often it can be tricky because you move into that more supervisory role and you don't necessarily have any different skill sets from one week to the next. And all of a sudden you're also having to take on some responsibility towards the people who've been your peers, as you said, Lee, as well. So it can be quite challenging to do that as well. So it's the journey of coming from up the ranks and moving into that sort of leadership role. But sometimes when you get there, there's things that come up that you haven't really thought of in that regard too.
Yeah, it's surprising how many courses we've actually run with clients on leadership skills that focus on the actual ability to lead the team, but don't necessarily touch on that particular point about how you manage the relationships, how you manage the kind of the peer-to-peer kind of situations that you previously had.
Yeah.
And as we both know, and very early on in my career, I came across that situation where, because of my knowledge and ability and technical knowledge, I got promoted into managing the team that I'd just been part of. And again, you're dealing with kind of situations where, you've changed now, your management, and we can't be as open as we were to you, etc. So I'm just curious, have you come across examples of that, and how do you get around that, or how would you advise people to kind of deal with that kind of relationship difference?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, isn't it? And I think, as I said before, it is something that, I guess my personal experience one to share. It was back when I was working in the NHS many years ago now, and I was part of a team doing a HR role, and it was actually due to a reorganisation, a sort of structural reorganisation in the business. We sort of had to apply for new roles, and I thought, well, actually, this is a bit of an opportunity. I'd always wanted to progress, so let's apply for one of the management roles. So I did, and I was successful, which was great. And obviously there's all these people going through this change, but then when they were sort of communicating the outcome, what I hadn't realised is that me with no management skills or experience was now managing the person that used to manage me. So it was awkward, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I had to have quite a big think about that pretty early on, because I was like, do you know what, if I'm going to make this successful, we need to sort of address the elephant in the room, really. So I actually kind of had a one-to-one with her straight away, and I said, look, let's just talk about this, because we can't ignore that it's not a thing, because it's a thing. So let's talk about it. And just sort of faced, probably a bit brave in that situation, and sort of faced head on into that and had a conversation with her about how I felt about it, how she felt about it, and how ultimately we thought that we could work together. And I think from kind of setting out almost a bit of a contracting type conversation, like how I think we can work, this is what would concern me, this is the type of support that I need, what do you need? Just having that really kind of open communication early on, and almost in some kind of ground rules about the way we were going to work. That was one thing that I found quite useful straight away. So it's perhaps something, if people are in that situation, they could consider doing if they have come from within a team to managing a team. Because I think to just sort of ignore it and go into your same role, I certainly found that conversation something.
I mean, that must be incredibly difficult, particularly if that person was going for the management role again themselves, to subsequently find them being managed by one of the previous direct reports. And if they're receptive to that conversation, that contracting, as you pointed out, fantastic. But what if they're not? Or what if there's kind of like a bit of aggression there, or a bit of kind of remorse, as it were? That must be a very daunting situation to find yourself in.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's, in that particular process that I was talking through, it's sort of a change management piece. So I think, it's about understanding, is that forming, norming, storming thing, or actually it's just kind of the stages of change that you go through. So there was a bit of upset to start with, but the upset actually wasn't directed to me. It was directed to the people that had actually kind of made that decision. But I think they respected that I'd had that conversation with them. And, over time that did dissipate to a certain extent. I mean, ultimately, within 12 months, that individual did leave the organisation. That wasn't, they were sure with time due to their desire to progress, and they felt there wasn't
right
in that organisation. But I think actually having that conversation early on and talking about, I understand that you feel angry and disappointed, and having a certain amount of empathy with that, because I would have felt the same. Sort of being on that level and having that conversation, and recognizing the anger. But I think then there comes a point, doesn't it, that if that turns into, and actually you're not then able to do your job or work together because of it, that's a different type of conversation. But that was how that one sort of played out for me.
I think that leads really nicely, just thinking of your experience there, Gemma, when I was thinking around honesty and trust is really, really important, particularly in that situation. And I've been there too, where you all of a sudden find yourself supervising or managing the team that you were part of. And I think just tackling it, like you say, it's the elephant in the room, it's happened. But it is happening, and we need to make a success of it. So just being honest, kind of putting yourself out there to show you can be trusted, and that you're kind of fostering an honest sort of putting your stall out in a way that you're true to your values and true to yourself. You don't treat those individuals, or potentially the tricky individuals, any differently from anyone else. I think, really helps. I've also, and a number of times in my career, it's been really difficult because I've come in and been the person who got the job from outside the team, but other people in the team have gone for it. And like you say, that's really hard because you know how you would feel. So I think just being very transparent, very honest, I think having that conversation, as you said, Gemma, let's see how we can work together. What's our expectations of each other? How can we support each other? What do you need from me? This is what would be great from you. And then if it starts to go a wee bit sideways, that you need to just set out your stall and take on that task, that you are there to do a slightly different job now. I think one of the other things that I learned, we've talked about this before, Lee, probably the hard way, is when you are also promoted out of the team that you have come from, it can be really hard to always be the one to solve. It can be really easy, to be the one to solve the problems, because right? So you can see there's some difficulty or something needs fixed, and you can quite easily go into telling mode. And actually, I had to check myself and say, okay, well, what do you think? Well, you guys you can sort it. You don't need me to tell you. But I think sometimes when you've done the job, it's very, very easy to think it should still be done your way, even though you're not doing it anymore. And I would say that's a bit of a cautionary tale, because when things start to change, you might like it done when you were there, but you're not anymore. So get that.
I think you're right. It's about the contracting, isn't it, that you said before, in terms of those relationships. And I think that's the thing. It's the setting out of your stall, as you mentioned there, in terms of what your expectations are. And I've worked in situations or been in environments where the relationship you had with your peers at an employee level when you're part of that team, they want to continue that when you're the leader. And that then often requires you to look at behavioral standards, because maybe some of the how shall I say this, maybe some of the language being used, or some of the kind of references, or kind of the joking kind of approach in meetings, etc. As the leader, that dynamic has to change, because there has to be a respect and authoritative kind of level there, etc. And as a result of mishandling that, people can get offended, or like I said before, you're no longer one of us. You've changed since you've become the manager. Or if they don't kind of do that, they go the opposite end of the spectrum, where the rest of the team seems an almost over friendly approach to you as the leader now, and kind of the connotations of that oh, now you've got favorites because you were their mates when you were a part of us, and now you're the leader. So again, I'm just really curious in terms of, like I say, when new managers are appointed or promoted, etc. What do you think should be part of the kind of training package, if you were, to kind of help that new leader manage those relationships? Is it just about trust, or are there specific things that maybe they should be focusing on, almost like a checklist, as it were, to kind of consider those relationships as they move into that new manager role?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots you could include in, if you were kind of to do that check, that sort of contracting. I think the kind of values and what, kind of just resetting of expectations, and how do you have that type of conversation. I think for me, one of the other things, Geraldine was previously referring to, actually, you can very quickly become a problem solver because you know the answer, because you used to deliver the answer. And often I think you could fall into that trap of, I am going to solve the problem, because actually that's within your comfort zone. You know how to answer the query or to do the thing, you used to do it. And I think when you're not as confident in your management skills, you can be like, well, I can help the team with this, and they're going to see me as the leader because I will solve the problem. So I think it's something about kind of, how do you take a step back? How do you really get a good understanding of what the leadership and management role is, and where your boundaries, professional boundaries, are with that? So, and it will be different depending on the role you've gone into, but are you now more responsible for the kind of strategic? So is it about setting a longer term vision for the team? Is it about building the team, understanding the dynamic, looking at the roles and the responsibilities? Is that where you need to spend your time, as opposed to doing the do, whatever that might be, and whatever? How do we support and guide leaders in that side of things? Because often they just won't have had, they'll be very technically competent and capable, but they won't have had the experience, for example, of developing a team. They won't have had experience about, how do we get people behind a plan? How do I resource the plan? How do I manage the plan? How do I steer that when that goes off track? So all of those things that come into a leadership and management role, I think, are very different. And I think mindset is the other thing for me, because again, one of my experiences that is really, some in your career just really stick out. I remember once I went into this leadership management role, and I went out all day and I was talking to people about their people challenges, coming back, putting a people plan together. And I got back to the office, and I remember saying to a colleague, I was like, I haven't done any work all day today. All I've been doing is talking. And do you not think that's what your work is now then? And I was like, oh yeah, he's right. I've actually developed relationships. I've been researching. I've been building a plan. But in my head, I've been going around having some lovely conversations. So I think that mindset piece about what is my role now, in terms of, maybe it's not a checklist, but in terms of that sort of training and support piece, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, and I think again it's kind of shifting that mindset, isn't it? That as a leader, almost as you guys both know, because we've both spoken about it, the leader being the coach really of the team, rather than the actual
100%.
teller, and it's developing that mindset and changing the relationships with people, so they recognize that as well. And there is that kind of harmony, there is that kind of respect for you and your new position, but also not kind of losing the kind of comfortableness that people have with you, that may have been built up over a number of years of working with them in the team. Now they may be a little bit apprehensive, I guess, that they've been open and honest with you about senior leadership decisions, the business decisions in the past, and now you're part of that kind of senior leadership or management team. So it's managing those apprehensions that what they've said to you in private previously, and again, it all goes back down to the relationships, doesn't it, really? So yeah.
And I think that's really important. And again, boundaries, I'm a complete in agreement of. And I think sometimes it's about the individual who's taken on the promoted post to say, okay, maybe we need to work slightly differently, but as you said, Lee, we'll still have all these relationships. All of these things are still valid, but just setting out what your boundaries would be. So you maybe can't go, singing and dancing down the pub on a Friday night anymore. Maybe you can, I don't know, but I think just knowing what your boundaries are. The other thing that springs to mind is around objective setting and coaching. So the ability to do some coaching questions, which will help you not to fall into that, I'll just fix it, or it should be done my way, because that's how we always did it when I was in the team. But the ability to be, open up this idea of how to be a bit of a coach for your team, but also how to set, really valuable objectives for people. I think I found in my experience when I was able to do that, because then you were being action focused, you were kind of looking to the future, and it meant everyone was quite clear.
Yeah.
The other thing as well, and I think it's worth saying, we're sort of looking at the pitfalls here, but sometimes as well, when you are promoted for the first time out of the team that you are in, and you take on that team, it can be really positive, because very often, if you've been a great team player, you've got fantastic relationships with people, you have people trust in you, you've got a high degree of integrity in the team, people can be so supportive of you, and actually really help you to grow. And I think that that's really important as well. And oftentimes that is how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, I think from an organization's point of view, that's fantastic as well, because they can demonstrate that actually internal progression does happen. And that's a positive thing for the rest of the workforce culture as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, if there were things that colleagues were perhaps confiding in you before that used to frustrate them, actually your position now means you've got that sort of positional influence, doesn't it? So actually you can potentially bring about some change. And, even if it's some sort of quick, small wins for the team that you can then celebrate to kind of, again, sort of re-engage or engage those people that are going to support you. And I think it's a bit of a role model for them, for other people. They might be sort of sometimes sitting there, well, could I ever progress? And actually you can show, yeah, you can, and it is possible to do it within the same organisation. Because a lot of people, again, I see, when people that leave, it might be to progress. Sometimes they come back. But actually to do that within some organisation, if you've got that support structure in place.
Yeah, I think again, it's you mentioned about the positives there, Geraldine. I think you're absolutely right there, not to lose sight of that. But I think again, it's kind of how you're conscious of your bias, whether that's kind of the halo effect that you may have with some colleagues, or the kind of the horn effect, where it's the negative thinking around, and managing those potential bias is important as well, and getting the right outcome from that point of view. So there's almost an element of your own emotional intelligence, your own kind of awareness, your own kind of consciousness in terms of how you're being perceived, and also how you're yourself are looking at your actions that may be detrimental to ongoing team relationships, and how you're perceived by other leaders as well in terms of the relationships you have with your team. So there's a heck of a lot to kind of consider as the new leader, and to add into that process, you've actually been within the team, the team really well, can be a potential hazard, but also, as you mentioned, Geraldine, can be a boon as well.
Yeah. I think that if you are in this concept of what we're talking about, going from employee to leader, and there's someone who is wanting to progress and start taking that journey to move away from employee to leader, I think how you conduct yourself in the workplace, and what your values are, and how you are a member of the team, sets you up on a great path to become the future leader you're going to be. And things like being really reliable. So if you say you're going to do something, you do it. How do you show up every day for your team? So when people confide in you, does it stay in confidence? Are you the person that chats around the water cooler and maybe, stirs the pot, or not? And I actually think those things are really, really important in how you're perceived by the other leaders who are watching, what's happening in the workplace all the time. So you kind of saying, this is who I am, these are my values. do people come and gossip with you and you get involved with that, or do you sort of extrapolate yourself from that and that's not really your thing? Do you get involved in office politics? What kind of team player are you? And I think for someone who's looking to start to progress in their career and move up into supervisory and management and leadership roles, actually those skills that you learn and you practice as a member of the team are really what will get you noticed, I think. I don't know if you would agree, Gemma.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I always say, like, when people are looking to develop internally, we have an advantage, don't we? Because we know everything about you. We know how you show up. We know how you act. We know if you turn up on time. We know if you deliver your projects. Whereas when you're kind of looking at bringing an external talent in, what we actually know is what story someone gives us in an interview. So I think in some ways, people internally, there's a higher bar there to some extent because you've got the year's worth of history. You've seen them on their development journey. You know when they've made a mistake, but you know how they've owned that mistake or not. You know how they or not. So I think there's actually lots of opportunities for internal talent development through that pipeline into leadership, but it also comes with that perspective that we know everything. So I do think, from an early, if that is your sort of aspiration, those things that you do day in, day out consistently, really, really important.
Yeah. So I have a question for both of you in terms of, I guess, from an L&D provider point of view. Do you feel that those behaviours, those actions that you just described earlier on there, Geraldine, that a leader should be demonstrating, do you think they're imparted enough for a new leader as part of that transition process? Is it covered already in leadership training courses, or should there be more of a focus on those exact behavioural actions that you mentioned in terms of best practice? What are your thoughts and experiences on that?
I think so. I don't know what companies, other than the companies I work with, companies will do their own things. I think in my past experience, nowhere near enough. Certainly for me, you learn sort of by learning from your mistakes and what you didn't get right. So I think having things in place to really help people with their communication skills, handling those tricky situations where you maybe are managing your team, where you're within the business and everyone knows you as one way and then you have to be quite different. Those are all soft skills that I think would be so valuable. Like if I look back to my early career, it would have been amazing for someone to sit me down or go on some supervisory type training, soft skills stuff where I could really understand better how to approach something that was tricky, or to be more managerial, or not just dive in. But I think also as well, you have to be really open to yourself and understand. I think you touched on it, Lee. Self-awareness is really key. Not to digress into a story, but the first company I worked for after university was an incredible company with a truly amazing culture. They were very open. Everyone was encouraged to say, I don't know how to do that. This is what I think I need to do to learn how to do that. And then I'll go off and do it. Does that sound okay? And that was amazing. And that was my first sort of real corporate experience. It was okay to make mistakes, but you owned your mistakes and you put your hand up and you said, and this is what I think I need to do to remedy. We had a very open culture that if you needed to get help to fix it, you went and asked. And I sort of grew up in that environment where, this culture around people being engaged. And if you didn't know, you would go and ask someone. You had mentors formally and informally. It was amazing. You can imagine my shock when I moved on years later to my next company and I said, I've made a mistake. And everyone went, you don't say that here. And I was like, what do you mean? Wow. So I think that having a real sense of self-awareness and understanding what you need to make you feel comfortable to take on that role is actually really important. And I'm not sure we ever really think about that too much as a early leader, because you're just so busy trying to get on the hamster wheel and do what you need to do. So I would say take a pause and actually think, what skills do I need? And then find a way to go and find them.
Yeah.
Gemma.
it's great if you've kind of worked in that organisation where you've got that kind of learning culture and actually that kind of no blame and it's okay, but take responsibility for your own learning and development. What do you need and how it's best for your learning style to kind of go and get that information? I mean, I think for me, I mean, we do, I see a lot of kind of leadership and management programs that perhaps focus on a lot of kind of knowledge, sometimes with a bit of that kind of soft skill edge as well, and sort of opportunities to practice that. It's the behavioural piece that I think we should do more to kind of focus on. And I think, sometimes you can deliver that, in a training course or a program and, but I think a couple of the key things for me is actually the role of coaching and mentoring in this space, because as much as we talk about, here's the soft skill of communication, let's explore how that might look. Let's explore how that might look in a conflict situation. You can understand the theory of that, you can understand your style and their style and all the rest of it. But I think when you've actually then got a real life situation, somebody, either from a coaching capacity, as you said earlier, Geraldine, to ask you some of those prompting questions to, open up your thought process, or somebody who's more experienced to kind of just talk through the specifics of a situation, what your plan might be. I think that's really valuable for new people into leadership roles, kind of making that transition. And I think that's, would be a kind of key focus area, if I was talking to somebody about that transition, like who can we partner you up with who's perhaps do the same transition at some point in their career, share their successes, but again, kind of open to learning, and really embracing that and doing something. But I think that's really key.
I think you're spot on there. I think the importance of the mentor is so kind of critical, really. Just kind of smiling away because I was aware of a situation where an organisation did exactly that. They used a mentor scheme of existing managers to guide and give insight to new managers coming up. And unfortunately, the same situation that we're talking about, an employee stepping up into a leader role, a mentor advised the new manager, you just need to let them know that you're the boss now, for them not to question you, not to say anything, and just do as they're told. So I think mentors are great, but you need to make sure you've got the right mentor with the right messages, instructing individuals appropriately.
Yeah, and one of the things we're doing at the minute, we're doing a lot of, we're doing a mentoring with confidence program for our mentors, because again, we have a lot of people that have been mentors for a number of years. And we've got some people that want to develop their leadership skills. So we're actually doing some mentoring training. And I think having some kind of structural framework or some sort of selection of the mentors and then trying to match them with a right mentee, again, it's something we've done a few sort of development programs recently. And I was asking for some advice and I was like, how do I match people? And the advice I got was that, it's not necessarily a science, because actually it's that chemistry and that sort of mentoring or coaching. And, as much as I can think, well, that person over there and that person over there would be a really good partnership, I think there is that sort of chemistry piece in mentoring, that is really important. Sometimes you can't get right, particularly from where you sit as an L&D person, you don't necessarily, you can guess, but you don't know the ins and outs of every single situation. So I think mentoring is good, but it's about, the right people at the right time in the right situations. But equally, sometimes coaching, I think it's just weighing up what's right for that person, given the transition that they're going to make.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, coaching, mentoring, the individual, the employee that we're talking about here, moving that up into that leadership role, has to feel comfortable that they can get some insight, some guidance, some support from somewhere. Be it, as I say, that the mentor, the coach, the manager, or even the HR department, there's got to be that right level of empathy. And I think that's the key thing for me in terms of this subject, that a lot of the time the employer often feels that, it's just a progression. They must be happy about kind of getting this new role, this promotion, this potentially new salary, etc. But forget that sometimes there is the fear factor around, I'm about to manage my old team. I know the relationships. I know the difficult people within that team that I'm going to have to deal with. So knowing the emotions, as we've talked about, the contracting that needs to take place, but also how to help individuals manage real concerns around the fear potentially of those future working relationships is important. But I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's knowing where that support lies, and it could be in multiple areas really. But knowing that they've got an avenue to that is crucial for them to step up into that role comfortably. The reason I mention that is, again, from history. I know an individual that was offered the opportunity to be promoted and declined it because they were not comfortable leading the team that they were currently part of, which is such a shame in terms of their talent, not just for the individual, but for the organisation as well.
Yeah, it's difficult. I can, in some situations, perhaps, sometimes it can be an avenue to maybe go and manage or lead a different team and then come back once you've kind of developed that skill. Or I see sometimes people go to a different organisation and develop that skill because they just feel either more comfortable or because they're coming in as Gemma the manager, Gemma the boss, Gemma the leader, as opposed to Gemma who used to be our friend. And I think sometimes that's just an easier transition to make, but there is that talent that's then leaving your organisation. So I think the more actually we can do to focus on that support for people, we're keeping the talent, we're keeping the experience, we're showing people there is that internal route of progression. It's just putting the energy and time in place that's needed, really, so you're not having that loss because reasons.
I think if we had anyone listening to this podcast that's in that situation where they are about to make that move from being the employee into the leader, just to kind of to finalize your thoughts on this, what would be your one tip that you'd give them as best piece of advice, that the one thing that you feel that they should be doing? Thoughts on that?
Do you want me to?
It's hard to boil it down to one.
I know, really difficult just to do one. Okay.
I would say be authentic, which I know sounds really simple or hard, I'm not sure, but be authentic, be you. Don't change who you are or your values. Stay true to your values. Think about how they play out in your new leadership role, because again, one of the things that I see is when people try to be different, and they're trying to, they can sometimes get that kind of inner conflict and that can be really uncomfortable and can make them actually feel really stressed and then ultimately do a good job. So I would say know yourself, be authentic, stay true to your values, think about how they play out for you in that role and what support you need with those things in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree with you more. Being true to yourself and sticking close to that for all the reasons you said, I think is so important. And I guess just being able, to add something on top of that, to be able to seek the help when you need it, ask for feedback. If you're not sure, do something about it. But, asking for feedback, trying to, roll that into what you're doing and what you're learning, I think would be a useful tool. But yes, stay true to your values, definitely.
Awesome. That's fantastic advice there. And as we've discussed on the whole of this podcast, some great pointers there for individuals that find themselves into that situation, and also managers or even HR professionals that are having to kind of coach and guide and help people make that transition. Very useful comments there. So thank you again, both for your insight and your thoughts and your experiences. Very much appreciated. And I hope the people listening actually feel there's some benefit from those comments, which I'm sure they will. Thanks again, and I hope to see you on future podcasts, but for the time being, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.
Calling all HR professionals, leaders and managers. Are you ready to take your workplace strategy to the next level? At 2Js, we get it. Managing people, driving engagement, and keeping up with ever-changing HR challenges isn't easy. But what if you had instant access to expert-led training, ready-to-use HR toolkits, and practical resources, all designed to make your job easier? From leadership development to conflict resolution, employee engagement to resilience training, we've got the solutions you need when you need them. And here's something just for you. Use discount code podcast25 at the checkout for 25% off all purchases at 2J's HR store. No more wasting time on outdated processes. Visit 2jshrstore.com today and claim your exclusive discount. Because great HR isn't just about policies, It's about people.